Chapter 331, Divine Trace 3. Sometimes, instinct takes over before reason has a chance to catch up. And when it does, it's usually survival instinct. That was why I didn't overthink it, I acted impulsively. I'm sorry. I beat the smiling woman to the punch before she could continue speaking. In situations like this, groveling took priority over figuring things out. Hesitation would only escalate this mess into a full-blown disaster. I didn't need introductions to know who she was. If I didn't, then that would make me an idiot. Of course, words alone wouldn't cut it. To make my apology seem genuine, I immediately dropped into a full bow, head to the ground, what some might call a kowtower dogeza. A gesture like this ought to show my sincerity. Ah ha ha, how refreshing. I couldn't see her face with my head down, but her hearty laughter suggested she was at least somewhat satisfied. Whether she appreciated the apology itself or was just entertained by the sudden display, I wasn't sure. Come on, raise your head. It was hard to meet you, so we should at least talk face to face. I'm sore. That's enough. Just look up. Her tone was more of a command than a suggestion, so I quickly obeyed. Judging by her reaction so far, it didn't seem like she was about to shout, "You faithless wretch!" and kill me on the spot. At least she was giving me the chance to speak. As I raised my head, the first thing I saw was her drinking straight from a leather flask. Or not, I suddenly felt uneasy. She was downing something that looked suspiciously like alcohol, and it reminded me of a historical drama I'd seen before my possession. Did she tell me to raise my head, not to talk but to behead me? It was scary. I was afraid that the alcohol in her mouth might spray onto my face. I didn't want to die, but dying while being misted with alcohol was even worse. Phew, want some? No, I'm fine, really. Well, it might not suit you Southerners' tastes. If she noticed my fear, she didn't show it. She quickly drained the flask after offering me a drink and being declined. It was a fairly large one, but she emptied it in one go. So she was a real drinker. Anyway, after showcasing her drinking prowess at our first meeting, the woman looked at my stiff posture and smirked. You probably already know, but I'll introduce myself since this is our first meeting. I'm the being you call the Eternal Blue Sky. A sky god, in a way. The words confirmed what I'd suspected, and hoped wasn't true. I bit my lip. For a fleeting moment, I thought that maybe this was someone else, like a lesser spirit or a messenger, or even Constantina. But of course, it wasn't. It's an honor to meet a god. Honor? What honor? I'm already a fallen deity. She replied with laughter rather than anger, but that made it even worse. After all, I played a big part in that fall. I think I'm going to lose it. Her being furious would at least be something I could prepare myself for. But this, I had no idea how to react. Honestly, I'd never even considered meeting a god in the first place. Hee, are you feeling sorry? As I hesitated, unsure of what to say, the Eternal Blue Sky laughed again. I appreciate it, but you're overestimating yourself. The moment settlers emerged, it was only a matter of time before a nomadic god like me would lose relevance. You just sped things up a little, it's not entirely your fault. The Eternal Blue Sky said this while vigorously patting my back, telling me to straighten up. She was like a boisterous mother comforting her dejected son. And that was what was driving me crazy. Why was she reacting like this? Wasn't she supposed to be mad? Bedler clearly said that the god was furious and interfering with my wound. Considering I'd killed her apostle, desecrated her temple, and defiled a sacred relic of hers, it wasn't surprising that a deity would be furious. I'd never once doubted that the Eternal Blue Sky was angry with me. I was just amazed at myself for achieving the grand slam of blasphemy in a world where gods really existed. Was it a misunderstanding? For a moment, the thought crossed my mind. Maybe the Eternal Blue Sky didn't actually harbor any personal feelings toward me at all. After all, how could a human understand a god's mind? The strong divine energy in my wound might have been just a coincidence, or Kagan's independent evil deed. Also, her sudden appearance before me might be out of pity for my futile efforts and prayers. Yes, I should reflect. The benevolence of Mother Sky was beyond my comprehension. But, to be honest, I was a bit pissed when things escalated so grandly. I guess not. I'm screwed. When someone says, I was pissed, it's usually a passing comment. But when a god says it, that was serious. You killed the apostle I cherished, tossed aside the sacred relic I gifted with care, and even demolished my temple. Honestly, I've never encountered someone like you, not even during the era of religious wars. I'm sorry, Being scolded for actions that would have been unthinkable even during holy wars made me feel like I'd committed some sort of war crime. I couldn't even raise my head. Whatever. The punishment's been dealt, so it's over. Honestly, it was partly for show. A god who lets their faith waver without consequence might be seen as weak. The eternal blue sky trailed off, then closed her mouth tightly and scratched her cheek as if embarrassed. Now I was nervous. What was she leading up to? Aren't you curious why I'm in your body? Ah, yes. I nodded instinctively at her words. Of course I was curious. Even the holiest saints and most devout priests only received divine power, they didn't share their bodies with a god. A person hosting a deity directly would practically be a god themselves. And I wasn't even remotely devout. The idea that this was just some form of divine punishment seemed excessive. If sticking herself to me was just to punish me, wouldn't that be a little obsessive? I'm trapped. Pardon, I said I'm trapped. The eternal blue sky lowered her gaze slightly, and I froze. A chilling silence hung in the air. I was able to hear the detailed story from the eternal blue sky. Her face reddened. When Kagan cut my body, all the divine power imbued in the sacred object transferred to my wound. Normally, such attacks only leave traces of divine power, but Kagan's final attack had been delivered with his full strength. As a result, the relic's divine energy moved with the intent to kill me. Of course, Kagan was the one who died, and normally, divine power that leaves a sacred object would disappear on its own. But I anchored it. Since an apostle inflicted the wound, I figured there was no need to cause further harm. Just having the wound linger seemed like punishment enough. Her intervention turned what should have been a fleeting divine presence into an eternal curse. As a god directly intervened, no mortal could remove this energy. And since the divine energy couldn't be removed, the wound wouldn't heal. This absurd situation continued for 3 years. I was planning to withdraw it after about a year. Her voice trailed off, but after a moment of hesitation, she continued. But during that time, I lost my place to stay. What? This was strange. She was explaining, but I couldn't understand her. A god needing a place to stay. Weren't gods supposed to live in heaven or something? Do gods have homes too? I asked, unable to hold back my confusion, and the eternal blue sky sighed softly. Yes, a shrine or any sacred site that holds divine energy, that's a god's home. I couldn't react to those words. If a temple was a god's home, then I could understand why she said she lost her place to stay. But you destroyed everything, so the only place with divine power left is your body. I felt like laughing hollowly at the eternal blue sky's slightly resentful glare. While destroying the nomads, rallying point in the north, I had also swept away the eternal blue sky's temple. Apparently, the nomads hadn't rebuilt them yet. As a result, there was no place in this world that could contain the eternal blue sky's divine power. Only I, who ended up with the sacred object's divine power in my body, became the sole bearer of the eternal blue sky's power and the only place she could reside in. What the hell? What a messed up situation. It was awkward for both me and the eternal blue sky. So, why did you appear now after all this time? If the fairies remove my power now, I'll die. I closed my mouth again at those desperate words. The eternal blue sky's sudden emergence after lying low was a last-ditch effort from someone teetering on the brink of existence. It was pitiful. I didn't fully understand what it meant for a god to die, but it didn't seem like a good thing judging by her reluctance. Maybe I should have held back a bit. Hearing her story, I couldn't help but regret my actions. If I had left just one temple standing, the eternal blue sky wouldn't have had to be trapped in my body, and she would have taken back the wound's energy on her own after a year. Of course, as someone harassed by nomads, I could argue it was self-defense, but if only war hadn't broken out. Didn't you directly order it? Since your apostle led the charge, I naturally thought so. I only chose him because he was devout. I don't issue war orders. If anything, I avoid them. My followers dying in battle would only weaken me. Wouldn't winning increase the number of believers? As if people would truly believe in a god they're forced to worship. Hearing this, I couldn't really blame her. From her perspective, she'd been caught in the crossfire of her followers' reckless actions. And considering history, the settled people had attacked nomads more often than the opposite. By that logic, my justification of self-defense might not even hold up. So, there's something I really want to ask, and that's why I called you. Seemingly embarrassed after venting her frustrations, the eternal blue sky cleared her throat and spoke cautiously. But it felt like she'd asked the wrong person. If she wanted help with a divine matter, she should have sought out someone like Tanian, a saint, not a swordsman like me. I'm not even a priest, so how could I help? It's okay. All you need to do is deliver a message to the fairies for me. Fortunately, I could do that much. I saw the elder's house instead of the pure white space when I closed my eyes and opened them again. Sky Lady, she was here. It's true, it's true. Energy, heavy, we can't take it. Moreover, judging from the fairies' conversation, it seemed that no time had passed while I was in the white space. She might have seemed pitiful while talking about having no home because of me and being trapped, but a god was still a god. She even transcended space and time like it was nothing. Kids, now that I was back, it was time to take care of the favor she'd asked. Ignoring it could be dangerous. If the eternal blue sky who had no place to go decided to lash out in a "let's all go down together" tantrum, my body would bear the brunt of it. Let's go outside for a bit. Outside, outside, outside. Why, outside? Boring. Elf Auntie lives a boring life. I saw the elder flinch at this sudden attack, but she tried to comfort the fairies. After all, this was more than just a favor, it was something that could benefit the fairies, too. You might be able to see your mom again. The moment I said that, I learned firsthand just how strong a dozen thumb-sized children could be when motivated. Let's go. Let's go. Mom, mom, mom. Really, really mom, not lying, right, right, lies are bad. If it's a lie, we'll cry. I really didn't need to learn this lesson while they were yanking on my hair, though. Kids, grabbing my clothes is more than enough. Isn't pulling me by my hair a bit too much? Chapter 332, Divine Trace 4. A man who just revealed his severe scars to the world being dragged outside by fairies pulling his hair, now that was enough to grab anyone's attention, regardless of whether they knew me or not. Fortunately, the elder's house was isolated even within the elven residential district, so he didn't attract the attention of other elves. I couldn't be sure if this counted as good luck, but it is what it is. We're out, we're out. Can we see Mom? Can we see her? I'm so happy, so happy. Once outside, the fairies released my hair and started buzzing in circles above my head, chattering excitedly. Kids, I get your excitement, but just because we're outside doesn't mean you can see her right away. I never said I'd show her to you immediately, you know. Children, just as I was about to speak while roughly fixing my messed up hair, the elder, who had rushed out after us, shouted at the fairies. How could you torment an injured person? Her words made my hands freeze mid-motion. Did she just call me an invalid? Sure, the scars were still visible so that misunderstanding was understandable, but the pain disappeared long ago. If a little hair pulling could cause bodily harm, I'd be as delicate as a sunfish. And I wasn't one. Carl, are you okay? Nothing's wrong, right? Did your wound open up? I'm fine. They didn't even touch the scar. The rest of the group stepped out before the bitterness could fade, their gazes turning to my wound. I am not a sunfish. Don't be mad, don't be mad. We only wanted to see Mom. We're sorry, we're sorry. Meanwhile, the fairies seemed fond of the elder who cared for them and was genuinely contrite after being scolded. They even apologized to me, which was unexpectedly touching. It looked like the elder had done an excellent job educating them. But what do you mean they can see their mother again? Watching the dejected fairies flying slowly, the elder cautiously spoke up. I wasn't sure whether the fairies' mother was the World Tree or Constantina, but the elder clearly shared their longing either way. So, she couldn't help but be interested. It's possible that the World Tree could be revived. I gave the elder the exact answer she wanted to hear. Quote. Revived, the elder murmured, her voice tinged with disbelief. I was just following the eternal blue sky's words, so I didn't know the details, but the World Tree might be resurrected after about 300 years if things went well. After complaining for a while that she would die if the fairies took away her power, the eternal blue sky cautiously continued. If the fairies take my power, my divine energy will be torn apart and I'll have nowhere left to stay. But if I can concentrate the divine power in one place, I'll be able to survive. You'd feel uncomfortable with me staying in your body too, right? In other words, she was politely asking for help in exchange for leaving voluntarily. Honestly, it was a win-win. I'd be rid of the power keeping me from healing, and the unwelcome divine squatter I hadn't even known about would be gone. I mean, I'd feel uncomfortable even going to the bathroom if I knew there was a god in my body. The only thing that bothered me was betraying the fairies who were gleefully anticipating gaining divine power. While I was in your body, I saw a tree imitating the World Tree. If you put me there, I'll take responsibility and turn it into the world tree. The fairies would like that, too. Is that possible? It's impossible to turn just any tree into the world tree, but the tree had sacred objects hanging all over it. With that much, it's possible. Apparently, the elders' efforts to create a stand-in for the world tree weren't wasted after all. Well, the fact that fairies who made the world tree their home were still alive meant they'd succeeded in imitating the world tree to some extent. While the elder was frustrated that no new ones had been born, maintaining the status quo was already an achievement no other elves could have managed. If the world tree is resurrected, spirits will use it as a gateway, fairies will be born again, and Constantina can communicate with the elves. The divine energy flowing through the world tree will be enough for me to survive as a god again. She boldly stated she'd take a middleman's fee, but we were talking about the resurrection of the world tree. A mere commission was something both Constantina and the elves would likely accept. Who knows? They might even worship her as a guardian deity for being the hero who resurrected the world tree. So, following her instructions, I touched the tree beside the elder's house. A glowing tree. The wound on my body glowed once, and then the entire tree started to sparkle. Even in broad daylight, the brightness was so intense it was impossible to miss. Hua, it's shining, shining. This is Sky Lady's energy. But, Mom's energy is here too. Can we see Mom? Is our home coming back? Wow. As soon as the tree started glowing, the fairies began to stir. To me, it was just a glowing tree. But for the fairies who were sensitive to divine power, it seemed to be far more. Mother's energy. This is amazing. For a mere tree to have this much energy. Even the elder, who had seen the real world tree, and Tanyan, a saint, showed unusual reactions. All signs pointed to the revival of the world tree, making it hard to dismiss as just excitement or misunderstanding. Honestly, I was pretty shocked. I sort of believed it because a god said it, but I had some doubts since this god had fallen to being an illegal tenant. I was worried it might be the desperate struggle of someone on the brink of death by fairies. Thankfully, even as a fallen deity, she was still very much a god. Baby, what's going on here? The Mage Duchess spoke up with confused eyes as the sacred objects hanging on the tree started to sparkle. She'd witnessed everything in real time. The tree lighting up at my touch, the fairies and elves reacting in awe, and the earlier conversations about reviving the world tree. Anyone who wasn't at least a little shaken by this wouldn't be human, or elf. If even I, a non-elf, found it interesting, then how much more would it be for the Mage Duchess with elven blood? A god was squatting in my body. Unfortunately, that was all I could say. How do I even explain something I didn't understand myself? Human, thank you. Our benefactor. We'll tell Mom about you. And the spirits too. Seeing the fairies rushing to cling to me, I could at least guess that things went well. I'm grateful too. Thanks to you, I'll live comfortably from now on. See, even a god is thanking him. What the hell? I flinched at the voice echoing in my head. Was there a wiretap in my ear? You might be the first person to curse at a god to their face. The eternal blue sky's voice still ringing in my head helped me quickly regain my senses. What's going on? Didn't you leave? I interrogated her mentally since it seemed like she could read my thoughts. She said she'd leave, said she'd be gone from my body. But this wasn't leaving, it was multitasking outside my body while still hanging around. I did leave, but I stayed in your body for about 3 years, so there might be some residual left. Her explanation was odd. Like someone moving out of a house but leaving behind traces of their life. How exactly do you clean up something like that? Don't worry. At most, it'll take 3 days for the residual energy to disappear. My power isn't strong enough to linger for long. Thankfully, she explained before I could ask further. Her reasoning that it'd end soon because she was weak was oddly self-deprecating, but I let it go since she didn't seem to be lying. And this tree is in better shape than I thought. At this rate, it'll become the world tree within 10 years. For elves and fairies, that's just a blink of an eye. I'll relay that to the elder as well. This was more good news. The elder and fairies would be delighted to know the specific time frame. Anyway, thank you so much. You helped me even though I'm not a god you believe in. I didn't know how to respond to that. I didn't do it for the eternal blue sky but for my own convenience. Even if there were no benefits to me, all I'd done was touch a tree, which wasn't difficult. I would have seriously considered self-destruction rather than helping if it had been Kagan residing in my body instead of a god. But a god, They weren't like earthly rulers who wielded their power over their subordinates or bore the responsibility to rule. Gods simply answered prayers and remained as they were. So, I had no particular grudge against the eternal blue sky. I wasn't sure if this indifference was because I didn't directly fight the god, or if my mental state was just unusual. Ah, once the residue disappears, your wound can heal too. Now we can call it a sacred scar instead of a curse. Oh, of course, it doesn't have any abilities, unlike Enon's stigmata. You're not expecting that from a god who can barely take care of themselves, right? No, I'm not. To be honest, I had been hoping for a little something. The elder's quiet house soon became noisy. Elves drawn by the self-illuminating, soon-to-be, world tree gathered, while the fairies who were overjoyed by the news that the world tree would fully revive in 10 years cheerfully played with the young human duke. Here, make yourself at home. Ah, yes, do you like tea? We have tea leaves that elves have been cultivating since our ancestors' time. If you're offering, I'd be happy to try some. And, of course, there was the elder, now gazing at me with a mix of overwhelming affection and approval. I was in the awkward position as the human lover of her granddaughter just an hour ago, a member of a race elves would prefer not to associate with, but also her potential future grandson-in-law. The elder had treated me with polite neutrality, unsure how to categorize me. But the moment I told her the world tree would be fully restored within 10 years, that neutrality was replaced by a bond of absolute solidarity. I wondered if she was being too believing of a human's words, but she must have sensed something as an elf who had seen the world tree herself. Foo-foo, that's right, we're having many guests after a long time, so I should put in some effort. Anyway, now that the elder had become my ally, she took an extremely gentle attitude towards my companions as well. Being a human personally hosted by an elder of the elves, this was something truly rare, an experience no one else might ever have. Just having this experience alone was enough to feel the worth of coming on this school trip. Even though it was only day 1 of the trip. Day 1. My head was spinning. It felt like we'd been through so much, but it was still only the first day. It feels like several weeks have passed. I hope we could have a normal schedule starting tomorrow. Chapter 333. We're here on a trip 1. We received curious and slightly wary glances when we entered the Elven residential district, but we were given an extremely warm send-off when we left. Come back anytime if you ever remember us. Our benefactors are always welcome. Make sure to visit us if life in human society gets too tiring. Living in nature can be fun too. The world tree, a symbol of the elves and the very core of their existence, had long been absent. While the younger generation seemed to have weaker emotional ties to the world tree, their elven instincts haven't disappeared. That was probably why they could share in the joy and laughter at the news of the world tree's resurrection. Benefactor, see you again soon, see you again. I'll definitely tell everyone about you. I'll tell Mom, and the spirit uncles and aunties too. Thanks. If the young elves with less attachment to the world tree were this happy, then it was no surprise that the fairies were even more enthusiastic. With the imminent resurrection of the world tree, their home and means of communication with their mother, the fairies refused to leave my side. Thankfully, judging by their words, it seemed like they didn't plan to follow us outside the sanctuary area. I'd ask you to stay here and live with us if it were up to me. But since you're a duke in human society, I suppose that's impossible. I'll keep in touch often. Yes, that's enough. I glanced over to see the Mage Duchess exchanging farewells with the elder. It seemed cruel to make them part after just a few hours when they'd met for the first time in 121 years, but it was okay since there were communication crystals in this world. The Mage Duchess created a communication crystal specifically for her grandmother on the spot and gave it as a gift. The elder smiled brightly, seemingly touched by the gift her young granddaughter personally made. Moreover, the Mage Duchess could teleport, so she could pop in for a quick visit anytime if she really missed her. Please take care of Trixie. I believe you'll do well without me asking, but I can't help worrying, it comes with age. The elder spoke to me gently after hugging the Mage Duchess. I'll make sure you'll have nothing to worry about. At those words, the elder's smile deepened. I made a promise to myself. I would invite the elder and other elves when I married the Mage Duchess. If they were reluctant to visit human society, we could also hold a second wedding in the sanctuary area. A wedding in both human and elven traditions would be the perfect way to honor our union. Little human, see you next time. Yeah, little human, it was fun. I'm not little. Liar. Lying is bad, you'll get scolded. Eek, Meanwhile, I saw the young duke who had been playing happily with the fairies bidding them a tearful farewell. Still, it was good to see they'd bonded so well. Considering that she might one day oversee the sanctuary area, a close relationship with the fairies would undoubtedly be a great advantage. Tanian quietly spoke up as we arrived back in the bustling commercial district. There will be quite a commotion in the parish for the non-human races, sanctuary area for a while. Although Tanian spoke with a faint, regretful smile, the situation wasn't one to take lightly. If things escalated, the parish itself might have to withdraw entirely. While the Dawn sect was the dominant religion on the continent, each race still maintained its own gods and traditions. Of course, their traditions were shattered and their communication with their gods was cut off due to Apple's spectacular tyranny, but the elves were now in a situation where they could communicate with their old god within 10 years. Tanian wasn't tactless enough to dampen the mood, and he didn't raise any objections in the sanctuary area since the World Tree itself was also important to the Dawn sect. But for the Dawn sect parish established in the non-human race's sanctuary area, this must be a critical issue. Haha, I suppose I should tell the bishop there to prepare himself mentally. I felt a bit embarrassed after seeing him burst into laughter. I didn't regret helping to revive the World Tree, I'd do it again even if I could turn back time. But in a way, didn't I just demonstrate the resurrection of a different religion in front of a saint of the Dawn sect? At the very least, I could have shown some discretion and done it quietly when the others weren't around. I think I may have shown you something I shouldn't have. My apologies. Tanian blinked in surprise at my straightforward apology before letting out another chuckle and shaking his head. It's embarrassing that I've made you feel guilty, but it's really fine. Actually, the parish wasn't established to convert the non-human races. It was meant to provide comfort to those who had lost their gods. Comfort, yes. Doesn't God give peace of mind to believers? Although Enon isn't the god of the non-human, only a god can fill the void left by a god. How unexpected. I thought the parish was naturally set up to devour the non-humans who lost their gods. The first thing the bishop here built was not a church, but a soup kitchen and a clinic. I hear they still use the clinic as a substitute for a church. As soon as I heard that, I understood. It might be called a parish, but it was more of a volunteer organization. For its priests, leaving the sanctuary wouldn't be about shutting down a church but stopping their humanitarian efforts. And this is a secret, but the people in this parish are those who volunteered without ambition for promotion. I chuckled at Tanian, who was playfully whispering as if it would be a big deal if someone heard. I didn't really want to know that much. Let's stop the complicated talk there, it's time to have fun. We've seen a lot of elves, so now we should see non-human. As if the conversation was roughly over, Rudy's patted Tanian's shoulder and changed the subject. Right, that was correct. This trip was meant for us to experience the diversity of the races within the sanctuary. While we'd ended up spending most of our time with the elves, we still had time to make the most of what remained. It looks like the young duke wants to play more, too. At Rudis's words, everyone turned to the young duke, who was looking at a huge dog walking on two legs with sparkling eyes. A dog? I was a little confused for a moment, but I quickly came to my senses. That must be a beastkin, so some weren't humanoid, but instead had fully animalistic appearances. Caught in the spotlight, the young duke flinched before trying to defend herself with a forced dignified expression. I'm the future Duchess of Chenis who will manage this place. I need to know what kind of people live here. That's an admirable attitude. You'll make a great duchess. Margetta clapped and praised her bold declaration. Of course, we all knew it was a hastily made excuse. Still, it was cute. Although she was still young, she already knew how to make plausible excuses. After all, eloquence and quick thinking were important within the social circles. Please grow up just like that. If she did, then she'd become a duke beloved by nobles everywhere. Even her own vassals would likely pledge their lives to serve her. I hear there are mermaids over there. Apparently, you can even fish with them. Lather, who had been watching the young duke with a faint smile, pointed towards the lake as he spoke. But what was this about joint fishing with mermaids? Do the mermaids herd fish from under the lake? If that was the case, then I'd like to see it too. More and more of father's responsibilities began falling to me after he decided to abdicate. Thanks to that, I now handled everything except for the minimal duties that only the emperor could decide. So much so that I was starting to think that the famous saying, "The emperor handles all affairs of the empire," should instead be changed to, "The crown prince handles all affairs of the empire." Of course, handling all affairs was just a figure of speech. It was physically impossible for one person to handle every task, and the whole point of a government was to prevent that. Loyal and competent civil servants managed most issues, passing only the rare, unmanageable cases up the chain to the emperor or crown prince. It was truly unfortunate that the volume was considerable even then, but it was something to be proud of since it was a testament to how vast our empire was. What's this now? However, this seemed a bit much. While I was working through the remainder of the day's tasks after dinner with the crown princess, I received an urgent report, 2 reports, in fact, arriving simultaneously from unrelated sources. Confirmation of elves gathering in the Elven residential district within the non-human sanctuary area, testimony obtained about the imminent revival of the World Tree. Detection of massive divine energy within the parish in the sanctuary area. On-site priests identify it to be the energy of a god other than Enin. These were reports from Chenis Duchy and Austin's Archdiocese. Just reading the reports from both secular and religious sectors made my head throb. World Tree. Moreover, the report contents included words that induced even more headaches. I knew what the World Tree was. It wasn't some mythical relic from a bygone era, but a divine legacy that existed on the continent until the Apels era. Although it was the legacy of a god other than Enin, it was a tree revered even by the Dawn sect. Sadly, it burned down during the reign of Apple's 3 tyrants, but that event enraged the non-human races including elves, shocked the Dawn sect, and made countries across the continent shake their heads. The World Tree was that symbolic across the entire continent. They say it's been resurrected. How astonishing. The World Tree, cited as one of the reasons for Apels losing the mandate of heaven, was being resurrected during Kephalophan's era. This could only mean that the mandate of heaven was smiling upon Kephalophan. Moreover, Kephalophan's emperors have always claimed to be allies of the non-human races. In an empire devoted to harmony among all species, this event would bolster that ideology immensely. However, confirmed involvement of the prosecutor's office's executive manager in the World Tree's resurrection. This sentence was common to both Chenis Duchy and Austin Archdiocese's reports. That single sentence radiated an overwhelming presence. What on earth has he been up to? I couldn't help but laugh bitterly. I knew the academy had taken a school trip to the Chenis Duchy. Father decided to send them there instead of Boyar, so of course I was aware. But instead of quietly enjoying the trip, he managed to create a massive incident on the very first day. A little heads up would have been nice. I even thought that for a moment, but I quickly shook my head. The executive manager wasn't the type to act impulsively on something like this. If anything, he was the type of person who would immediately report anything just to avoid responsibility. This must have been an unintended accident. Yes, I should think positively. The resurrection of the World Tree was beneficial to the imperial family and the empire. The Dawn sect would also learn that an imperial civil servant was involved in the World Tree's resurrection, so they would express gratitude to the empire. The timeline for the World Tree's full revival was estimated to be within 10 years. Even if that was the maximum time set, there was little chance it would happen in just 1 year. That meant that the revival would happen during my reign, and all things considered, this was a positive development. Ellipsis. I grabbed the communication crystal on the desk. A good result didn't justify ignoring the process. I was resting in what felt like a long-awaited lodging after having a great time in the non-human sanctuary area and sending the young duke back to the ducal palace when the communication crystal vibrated. Submit a report on the World Tree resurrection incident that occurred in the non-human sanctuary area. Ah, the report's already been submitted. That was faster than I thought. Had the young duke already boasted to the wise duchess about her amazing experience? Or was the Chenis Duchy observing the sanctuary area in real time? Actually, it didn't matter which it was. How they found out wasn't important in this situation. What should I write? What on earth should I write in the report? Should I say, there was a god inside me, and it transferred itself to a tree, turning it into the World Tree? But if I did that, this wouldn't just end with a report, I'd get summoned for questioning. It'll work out somehow. My thoughts were short-lived. I couldn't write false information in the report, so I'd just have to write the truth. If the Crown Prince summons me after seeing that, then I could always throw a fit about how unfair it was. Knock knock. Opa, may I come in? Ah, yes, sure. Besides, there was something more important than the report waiting for me right now. I need to explain it to them properly. The wound I'd been forced to reveal because of the fairies, it was time to give an explanation. Nervous sweat trickled down my back. A poorly written report could be dealt with once I was summoned. But if I couldn't convince Louise and Irina now, then there wouldn't be a next time. Chapter 334. were here on a trip too. Of the 4 lovers who came on this field trip, 2 knew about my wound, and 2 didn't, a perfect 50-50 balance. If I included myself, that made 3 people who had kept silent, forming a majority. I didn't want to find out about Opa's injury by accident like everyone else. I wanted to hear it directly from Opa. I'm sorry, but having more people in the guilty party didn't change the fact that we were all just offenders here. In this situation, I, Margetta, and the Mage Duchess were all just culprits. It wouldn't be a crime if we hadn't been caught, but we were criminals since we were caught. And honestly, I couldn't argue with their frustration. After exchanging rings, we weren't just acquaintances anymore, we had a closer, more significant relationship. That kind of bond demanded honesty and transparency, not secrecy. From Louise and Irina's perspective, they'd been treated no differently than mere bystanders. It might have been different if none of my lovers knew, but how heartbreaking must it be when some knew and others didn't? The fact that the ones in the know were the first and second future wives only made it worse. Anyone can see it's discrimination. They had every right to think I'd chosen to tell the important lovers while leaving out the lesser ones. If our positions were reversed, I'd probably think the same. Damn it. Still, I don't think Opa did it on purpose. There must have been circumstances. That's why you said you'd explain everything, right? I nodded hurriedly at those words. Louise was right. It wasn't out of favoritism or malice but due to unavoidable circumstances that I hadn't told them. I think so too. At least, Opa not the kind of person who'd do this without reason, right? My already enormous guilt swelled even more after seeing Irina speak with a faint smile. I had let down these girls who trusted me so much. Glancing around in embarrassment, I caught sight of Margarita and the Grand Duchess, who were as silent as I was. They had no excuses either, given that it was because of my silence that they were dragged into this situation. Honestly, they were probably feeling unfairly implicated right now. This might take a while to explain. Is that okay? I needed to address this quickly. Any more delay would only make the anxious more frustrated and the guilty more uncomfortable. Yes, it's better than not knowing. Their firm and cutting responses almost made me close my mouth again. Right, of course. What a dumb question. The apology show disguised as an explanation was not just short, but very long. To explain my wound, I had to delve into the Great Northern War. There was no way to keep it short and simple. Injuries inflicted by the rebel couldn't heal. Some who fought him are still living with permanent damage, like amputated arms they can't regenerate. So, I explained in as much detail as possible, Kagan's vicious power and dirty unrecoverable curse, the numerous victims injured fighting Kagan, and the sad legend of how I got stabbed at the end. Of course, explaining the Great Northern War inevitably led to talking about the Six Swords, but thankfully they listened quietly. To be honest, I think I spoke a bit emotionally because their memorial was approaching, but I was grateful they listened despite it being TMI unrelated to the topic of my wound. The injury hasn't healed but it doesn't hurt anymore, and it doesn't interfere with my daily life. I planned to tell you when the time was right, when it wouldn't shock you. But, well, here we are. I'm sorry. In the end, I could only say sorry again. Whether I had hesitated out of fear of upsetting them, found it difficult to bring up, or simply didn't think it was worth mentioning, all of it boiled down to excuses now that the secret was out. So what else could I say? The only way was to explain why this grotesque wound occurred, why I kept quiet about it, and apologize. Clumsy self-justification or turning the tables would just be ugly. Opa. Yes. Louise was the first to speak after my apology. So, are you okay now? The fairies said something about divine energy. Is that related to your wound? It came along with a very important question. That's right. The power of the god the rebel believed in was stuck in the wound. It's fine now, so don't worry. As I nodded, Louise sighed with a relieved expression. Between the unhealable wound and the divine energy the fairies had mentioned, her mind must have been racing with all sorts of concerns. She was probably wondering if it was a curse from the god. Of course, it was a curse at first. But after the whole ordeal, the illegal tenant had been evicted, and the curse was no longer an issue. Thanks to the fairies removing the power, I should be able to recover from the wound soon. Really? Is that true? Even Margetta and the Mage Duchess, who had been quiet, reacted to those words. It was only a natural reaction, given that they'd known about my wound for longer and must have worried more. And just like that, the atmosphere shifted from an interrogation about hiding my wound to a celebration of its impending recovery. I'm saved. Opa's explanation that his wound didn't hinder his daily life, and he delayed telling us to avoid worrying anyone made sense. Or rather, I tried to make sense of it. It was a bit disappointing that we found out through other means instead of from Opa's own mouth, but it was hard to blame him when I thought about what I would have done in his position. I probably would have done the same. People naturally wanted to avoid unnecessary conversations and spare their loved ones from worry. Opa wouldn't have been any different. He'd explained himself well and apologized sincerely, so what would change if I pressed further? Wouldn't it just make Opa more uncomfortable? Let's let it go for now. So, I decided to skip the questions about the World Tree too. While it was true that the fairies said they would take the divine power from Opa, that didn't mean they succeeded. One of them had even complained about how heavy the energy was. You might be able to see your mom again. After that, Opa calmly led the fairies outside as if he knew exactly what to do. The result was so shocking that no one even thought to ask how he'd done it. With the World Tree practically on the verge of resurrection before our very eyes, who could stay composed enough to demand an explanation? Even the Elven Elder and the Saint of the Dawn sect had been entirely focused on the tree. How could anyone else be any different? It's probably not something he can talk about right away. And while the wound was Opa's personal matter, the World Tree was an issue that would stir up not just the Empire but the entire continent. There was no way Opa acted independently on such a massive issue, so he must have discussed it with the Imperial family. It made sense that he couldn't share the details with us, who weren't civil servants. I didn't feel slighted. Even in the Yorin family, critical contracts were kept tightly confidential. Opa had carried out a national-level task beyond a simple contract, so of course he couldn't explain. It's not like anything bad will happen to Opa, so it's fine. Crucially, the resurrection of the World Tree would help Opa's reputation, not harm it. This wasn't an urgent concern, and I could wait to hear the full story. So we shouldn't rush it and wait. It'd only make things awkward for Opa if we questioned a national matter, so let's wait for the day when Opa could talk about it himself. With the divine energy gone to the World Tree, the wound should finally heal. I'll explain the World Tree later. His words brought a faint smile to my lips. As expected, Opa didn't want to hide things from us just for the sake of hiding them. The interrogation caused by the forced confession about the wound ended on a warm and understanding note. I was so happy to have met such kind people in my life. They say you can ride centaurs for transportation in Santoria instead of carriages. That would feel a bit awkward, right? It's like piggyback riding for humans. Watching Louise and Irina chatter cheerfully only strengthened my conviction. I really was blessed with such wonderful people. Unlike the large group from yesterday, today's party consisted of just the three of us, Louise, Irina, and me. A rare treat, made possible only by the selflessness of Margetta and the Mage Duchess. It's true that I made a mistake. Even if it wasn't something to share lightly, I would have felt hurt in their place too. I'm ashamed as well. It's no different from excluding the children, so I should reflect on it. Their decision to give us this time alone was a remarkable gesture. Giving up part of their trip must have been bittersweet, but it showed how much they valued building bonds within the family. It was moving. Stories of rivalry and schemes between multiple wives were common, but in my case, there was only harmony and mutual consideration. How fortunate was I to have this? Thinking about how I'd excluded them by keeping secrets only made me more ashamed. Well, since we're here, we should try it. When else would we get this kind of experience? Still, wallowing in guilt would only waste this precious time. I leaned forward toward Louise and Irina, who were debating between centaurs and carriages. Should we? Louise, seemingly enticed by the word experience, fell into deep thought. It would be nice if it's big enough for all three of us to ride at once. Irina immediately agreed and seriously muttered. I understood their sentiment, but wasn't that realistically too much to ask? Even a centaur was still like a horse at the end of the day. Expecting one to carry 3 adults was downright cruel. I had clearly underestimated other races. Haha, I'm big enough to carry 3 of you just fine. The booming laughter of a female centaur rang in my ears. It was almost deafening. She stood noticeably larger than the other centaurs nearby, making her claim entirely believable. Of course, any more than that would be difficult. She added jokingly and laughed, but I could only manage an awkward smile. If it weren't for yesterday's hearing, there would have been 5 of us instead of 3. Is she taking a subtle dig at me? It wasn't likely, but the paranoid thought crossed my mind for a split second. Had the infamous, half-dozen little gold duke legend spread to the other races as well? Right, I was that bastard with so many lovers that I couldn't fit them all in one carriage. At least there was someone out there with double my number to take the spotlight off me. Now then, hold each other tight. The closer, the better. At the centaur's enthusiastic instruction, we carefully climbed onto the saddle. Guys, she said to sit close together. This seems like the safest way to sit. Louise sat in front of me while using my body as a backrest, while Irina sat behind me, hugging me tightly. It would have been a typical couple's riding position if just one of them had done this with me. But with both of them doing it at once, the scene felt difficult to describe. It looks good. I'm envious. The centaur praised us with a smiling face even while looking at this scene. What a true champion of customer service. A capitalist through and through. Chapter 335. We're here on a trip 3. The Duchy of Chenis, home to the continent's largest granary, was mostly sprawling plains. It was said that the plains here were larger than those of most small countries, a claim that felt less like an exaggeration and more like a daunting reality. Anyway, vast plains, expansive horizons, lush green grass. The Chenis Duchy offered an environment as good for horseback riding as the north. Guests, what do you think? The plains of Chenis are considered one of the empire's treasures. The environment might be too good, which was the problem. It's wonderful. It really is like a treasure. I'm glad you like it. The centaur let out a hearty laugh at Louise's response from the front. Even Louise allowed herself a small smile in response to the centaur's professional enthusiasm. The centaur galloped effortlessly while carrying 3 adults. Most non-human races wouldn't think of leaving the sanctuary, so those who did, especially ones actively working outside, like this centaur chauffeur, were extraordinary. Some people avoid traveling at night, but there's a unique charm to it. Galloping under a starry sky can be a truly magical experience. But watching the centaur chatter away without pause while running at full speed made it clear she'd found her calling. Loving both running and talking, and getting paid to do both simultaneously. It was the perfect job for her. That sounds lovely, but we work with horses, so I'd worry about the risks of riding at night while looking at the stars. Oh my, I didn't think of that. As an apology, I'll give you a free ride if you come at night. This time, Irina, who enjoyed horseback riding, answered with a slight smile, and the centaur sighed as if disappointed. And what was with the free service in the meantime? Was she a marketing genius or something? Oh, guests, would you like to visit the sea? For a small additional fee, I can take you there. Oh, that piqued my interest. The sea wasn't exactly close to Santoria, yet she was offering to take us there. We'd love to, but isn't it too far to run all the way to the sea? No problem. We can use a teleportation circle. Her response was delivered as if it were the most obvious thing in the world, making me laugh. Well, of course, this wasn't some remote backwater, it was a tourist hub in a duchy. Of course they'd have teleportation circles. Teleportation circles? Aren't those expensive to use? Louise worriedly spoke up at the mention of teleportation circles, but the centaur shook her head, still wearing a hearty smile. No need to worry. The Duke has contracts with centaurs like me, so we get to use them at a discounted rate while carrying passengers. That was more information than I needed, but it was interesting nonetheless. A contract between the Duke and the non-human races. Such an idea wouldn't be easy to come up with even as the overseer of the sanctuary, but the wise Duchess had implemented it without hesitation. Was this what they meant when they said genius and madness were separated by a thin line? She'd be perfect if only she didn't drink. No matter how you looked at it, the wise Duchess was clearly nerfed. Perhaps a sober wise Duchess might be a challenge even for the gods themselves. Although the trip to the beach was unplanned, I didn't mind. There wasn't anywhere specific we needed to be, and we'd saved a significant amount on the usual teleportation circle fees thanks to our centaur ride. I'll never get used to walking on sand. The centaur, who had been smiling consistently, frowned for the first time upon reaching the beach. Even as a passenger, I could see how difficult it was for her to walk. She seemed uncomfortable since her feet constantly sunk while carrying people. That's one of the airborne ships once operated by Opels. Still, seeing her quickly return to smiling and acting as a guide made me sure she was the equivalent of the Gold Duke in the centaur world. I think its official name was Glory of Apples or something. Isn't it funny to see that glory stuck in the ground? Indeed, it's quite ironic. It was easy to agree. On this continent, naming ships after rulers or nations was considered an unspoken taboo. After all, no one wanted to deal with the embarrassment if the vessel sunk. But Apels, in their overconfidence, named a ship after their entire nation, even calling it Glory. And the result? That Glory was grounded in the dirt. In a way, they might have predicted their own downfall. Thank you for the explanation. But walking in the sand looks exhausting. Would you like to take a break? After looking at the former glory of Apels, I offered the centaur trudging through the sand a break. While her friendly demeanor and detailed explanations made her an excellent guide, this was supposed to be a date for just the three of us. Having an outsider along for the entire trip was a bit awkward. I appreciate the thought, but as someone who's been paid, I must provide the best service to my guests. I slipped a few silver coins into her hand. Have a great time, I'll be nearby, so just find me when you're ready to go back. Watching the centaur quickly leave the beach while wagging her tail was oddly amusing. She's an interesting person. Yeah, I wonder if all centaurs are like that. Louise and Irina seemed to feel the same way, smiling slightly. Probably not. If the entire centaur race were this cheerful and approachable, they likely wouldn't have survived Apple's era. Plenty of species that tried to be friendly with humans ended up being exploited or worse. It was a sad but true history. For now, let's just enjoy our time together. She must have had a hard time carrying all three of us, so she deserves the rest. But those thoughts could wait. Right now, the priority was savoring this rare opportunity for the three of us to spend time alone. Getting off the saddle was bittersweet. It was a precious time when I could legally cling to Opa, even hugging him from behind. But I couldn't justify exhausting someone who had already worked so hard. And now that the centaur had left us alone, it was just me, Opa, and Louise, a perfect chance for some intimate time together. This might be even better. As I thought about it, I realized something. I'd never had a pleasant experience with Opa at the beach. Sure, we'd gone to the seaside during last year's school trip to the Duchy of Boyar, but back then. Wah, hick, the memory made me shake my head furiously. No. That was not a good memory. Not at all. As a noble, a lady, and a person, I'd completely lost my composure in front of him. I'd sobbed, wailed, and made a scene. And let's not even talk about what happened after. It was a nightmare and the only memory I had of being at the beach with him. I need to cover it up. It almost felt like a mission. If I didn't create new, happy memories to replace that humiliating one, I'd never be able to return to the beach again. Of course, just coming to the sea on a date with Opa was already half a success. All that was left was to stroll along the shore, dip our feet in the water, and try some local snacks. That would be enough to bury my trauma for good. It would have been nice if we had swimsuits. Greed raised its head slightly, but I forcefully suppressed it. Asking for too much at once usually backfired. Swimsuits could wait until next time. There would be plenty of summers to spend with Opa, anyway. Ah, you're back, Opa. I turned to see Opa approaching with drinks at Louise's voice. As soon as I saw the drink in his hand, I froze on the spot. It seemed that working with lunatics for so long had made me lose my grip on common sense, too. A normal person would have had at least a shred of awareness. Look, I didn't mean anything by it. I was trying to figure out what to get and ended up getting something that matched your hair color. Irina silently stared down at the lemonade I handed her. Facing her silence, I poured all my energy into making a desperate explanation. Quote. Unfortunately, it had no effect. Irina, who seemed to have entered a state of silence due to the mental shock, showed no reaction to any excuse. You idiot. Self-loathing washed over me. I didn't understand at first when I came back and saw Irina looking so stiff, but then it hit me, giving her lemonade was an unforgivable mistake. It wouldn't have been a problem if I was just giving her a drink. But we were at the beach, and I was the one who handed it to her, the person who had witnessed her most humiliating moment last year. It must have felt like I was teasing her. Honestly, she'd be justified in thinking so. What should I do now? I'd already made an excuse to step away from Louise under the pretext that Irina seemed to be getting motion sickness, but Louise would start to get suspicious if we stayed away for too long. I needed to wrap this up quickly. But how could I fix this situation fast? Opa, why yes. Go ahead. Thankfully, Irina finally broke her silence. I'm fine. Lemonade tastes good, after all. The empty look in her eyes told me everything. She was trying to erase last year's incident from her memory entirely. Or rather, she was desperately pretending it never happened. Irina, who had been suffering from extreme humiliation and despair, had finally started to escape from reality. Yeah, that's right. It's delicious. Because of this, I could only give an ambiguous answer. Any more apologies or excuses at this point would only emphasize last year's incident to Irina. That might push her from silence to tears. I'm sorry. No matter how much I thought about it, this was insane trolling. From Irina's perspective, who was at a sensitive and delicate age, she showed a side of herself that she couldn't even show to her family in front of the person she loved. Not only did I fail to help her forget that humiliation, but I even made her remember it again. I was the worst kind of bastard. Louise must be waiting. Shall we go back? So, I swept her into my arms as a form of apology before she could finish her sentence. If I'd stirred up shameful memories, the least I could do was try to balance it with something positive. Let's tell Louise we're staying like this until the motion sickness passes. Irina nodded blankly at those words. Actually, this was also something that had happened immediately after her humiliating moment last year, which might risk triggering more bad memories. But now that we were in a relationship, wouldn't it feel like a sweeter, more comforting memory? I wanted to believe so. Chapter 336. We're here on a trip for. Although I'd nearly reduced Irina's mental state to ruins with my careless choice, we could move past it as if nothing happened thanks to her heart being as vast as the sea. I felt sorry for bringing up the sea again, but it was hard not to when it was right in front of us. That was why I needed to reflect even more. Of all the things I could have chosen, why lemonade? I must have been subconsciously thinking about that day. I'm such an idiot. Opa, I think I'm getting motion sickness too. Give me a break. 2 is too much. Meanwhile, Louise playfully complained after seeing me carrying Irina, but it fortunately ended as just a joke. Instead, she looked worriedly at Irina, who had returned cradled in my arms. I couldn't help but feel guilty. What kind of face would Louise make if she knew this wasn't about seasickness but rather a mental breakdown? I would have to take that secret to my grave. Oh Opa, you can put me down now. Let's wait until we find somewhere to sit. Pushing yourself to walk might make things worse. Perhaps feeling the same guilt, Irina asked to be put down first. Of course, I didn't comply. My conscience hurts. After all, I was the one who caused her distress and then decided to pick her up without warning. Putting her down now simply because I was feeling awkward would be too selfish. Staying like this was the only right thing to do. For a moment, I wondered if coming to the beach was a mistake. But now that we were here, there was no going back. Instead, we should create good memories that would override her bad ones. Oh, look, they're selling squid over there. I felt Irina flinch at Louise's words, which had no ill intent. Completely erasing the past might be impossible, but I could at least try my best. We came all the way to the sea, but we couldn't go into the water because we didn't prepare swimsuits. Still, just strolling along the sand and taking in the view had its own charm, so it wasn't too disappointing. Actually, considering this subtly advanced world, it wouldn't be strange if there were places nearby renting swimsuits. A quick glance confirmed there were indeed a few such shops. But it wouldn't be proper for a noble to use items shared with commoners. Some nobles see it as a matter of pride, and even the commoners who use them afterward might feel uneasy. Seeing Louise gently refuse, I couldn't push any further. If Louise, who wasn't particularly fussy or authoritative, reacted like this, then it must be closer to a matter of cultural norm than just a matter of pride. Moments like this remind me that I'm a possessor. I thought I had adapted pretty well, but I keep getting hit with these differences in norms just when I think I've forgotten. Of course, some nobles don't care about such things, as long as the items aren't shared with others while they're using them. I guess that's true. Louise smiled gently at me as she noticed my embarrassed expression. Thanks for comforting me, too. Still, it's a bit disappointing. We came all the way to the sea, but we're just looking. Were you thinking of going into the water? Louise's giggling words made me unconsciously touch my wound area. The remnants of the past injury hadn't yet faded, and it still wasn't fully healed. I understood. Even if we had swimsuits, I probably would have just stayed on the shore. Besides, I'd feel bad about enjoying myself too much. I couldn't help but tilt my head at Irina's added words. Guilty. Wasn't today the time that Margetta and the Mage Duchess gave up as an apology? What was wrong with enjoying that time? Compared to the others, Louise and I feel like we just showed up. We haven't known Opa as long, and we don't have as many memories together. Although Irina was trying to smile as she spoke, her dejected expression became more obvious as she continued. Even Louise, standing quietly beside her, lowered her gaze as if she shared the same thoughts. My heart sank at the sight. I hadn't realized they were harboring such thoughts, and at the same time, I'd left them to wrestle with these thoughts alone. Of course, as Irina said, I first met them last year. It was a relatively late encounter compared to the Mage Duchess and the managers who I met right after the Great Northern War, and Margetta whom I met 2 years ago. Naturally, meeting later meant fewer memories together. But recognizing that they'd met me later didn't mean they should feel like they deserved less. This wasn't just about timing, it was a matter of self-worth and equality within our relationships. I've been neglecting them. I felt complicated. These women were blessings, each agreeing to share their lives with me despite the unconventional circumstances. I promised myself I would treat all 6 of them equally to ensure none of them felt overlooked. How could I face them if they had no problems between themselves but their future husband caused conflict through carelessness? I tried to treat everyone as fairly as possible. Sadly, it seemed like my efforts were nothing more than lip service. I couldn't even share something as significant as the truth about my injury equally. Louise and Irina's shock made that clear. Add to that the subtle instances I likely overlooked, and it was no surprise they might have started to feel sidelined. In fact, it was only natural. Being the newest additions to this relationship, Louise and Irina would have needed extra attention and reassurance to feel fully secure. Fairness wasn't always about equal shares, sometimes, it was about giving more where it was needed. And I hadn't done enough to bridge the gap between past and present. No, did I even show fairness in the first place? Had I ever expressed love that would reassure not just Louise and Irina, but all my lovers? If we enjoy ourselves too much when they kindly gave up their time. Before Irina could finish, I pulled her and Louise into a hug. They were conveniently sitting side by side on a bench, making it easy. Eep, oh Opa. They had different reactions to the sudden skinship, but I didn't mind. Don't think of it as them giving up their time. Today is time we rightfully have because Mar and Beatrix made a mistake. Once I knew their true feelings, I couldn't just sit still. They just said they felt like they'd butted in because they had fewer memories with me, yet they hesitated and feel sorry about creating memories just for us. It was an absurd contradiction, but it also meant that they were that intimidated. Moreover, they had to understand that today wasn't some act of benevolence. I thought of it as Margetta and the Mage Duchess giving up time too, but as an expression of apology while admitting their mistakes. On the other hand, the giving up that Louise and Irina were talking about was closer to a favor generously given by a superior. That wasn't okay. It was absolutely not okay. Even if the order of wives was determined by the order of marriage, there shouldn't be a hierarchical relationship among them. So let's have fun, more fun than anyone else. That way, there's no room for secrets or regrets moving forward. But Opa hid things too, right? At Louise's somewhat pouty voice, I instinctively closed my mouth. My real enemy was my past self. That bastard. The karma from my past mistakes kept holding me back every time I tried to say something sensible. I noticed some stores selling clothes earlier. I stood up while still holding Louise and Irina's waists after keeping silent for a moment. If I couldn't win with words, then actions it was. I'll buy you new ones. What? Opa, why are you run? With this unilateral announcement, I jumped into the sea. Anything people wore while swimming would be called a swimsuit anyway, right? I got a light scolding later, but at least they laughed as we splashed around. In the end, that was all that mattered. I ordered the executive manager to submit a report on the World Tree incident last night, and the report came in early morning today. Judging by the time, it seemed that he wrote it before going to bed and sent it right away. I might have thought he wrote it quickly out of laziness if it were any other report, but I understood because quick reporting was crucial for this incident. I would have been furious if he had taken days or weeks to explain in detail. Of course, just because he sent it quickly didn't mean I wasn't frustrated. This is maddening. The report was the first thing I checked out of habit after waking up, and I had to close my eyes again upon reading it. I thought I might be seeing things due to fatigue. Of course, it wasn't an illusion. It was just that the content was utterly incomprehensible to any normal thought process and knowledge. Your Highness, are you all right? You don't look well this morning. I just have something important on my mind. I'm not tired, so don't worry. The shock I received in the morning lasted until lunchtime. Even the Crown Princess who was dining with me asked worriedly, so I could only imagine how I looked even without seeing a mirror. Seriously, I smiled and answered the Crown Princess, but my mind was a complete mess. During the Great Northern War, the wound inflicted by the rebel was imbued with the energy of the eternal blue sky, the god of nomads. This energy was a massive fragment that included the god's will. Brief communication with it was made possible through contact with fairies that had survived until now, and it was transferred to a tree under the Elven Elder's care. That tree has now become the World Tree. The report only stated the necessary information, but at the same time, it was utterly baffling. A god and its energy being imbued in the executive manager, communicating with said energy and moving it to a tree. And then, the World Tree's resurrection. I couldn't understand what on earth this meant. It wasn't the feeling of hearing a half-baked excuse, but truly the feeling when common sense refused to understand. A god, suddenly. The confusion was overwhelming. Most gods had fallen silent after the religious wars, and Apple's brutal suppression of non-human races had severed any remaining ties to divinity. With the eradication of Twilight cult's followers, only Enon remained as the sole deity on this continent. Now, out of nowhere, another god's power had supposedly restored the World Tree. How was I supposed to process this? Should I even believe it? Of course, gods were beings that couldn't be understood by human common sense. If I had to choose between two possibilities, this being a divine prank or the executive manager submitting a fraudulent report, I'd lean toward the former. But, if the order of marriage determines who is first, then everyone becomes first if I marry them at the same time. Ellipsis. Come to think of it, he had already shown signs of madness before. Perhaps the latter scenario wasn't so unlikely after all. I need to report this to the Emperor as well. My head throbbed even more. Any matter involving non-human races required reporting to the Emperor. It wouldn't make sense for the Emperor of Kefalofen, the ally of other races, to be unaware of the World Tree's resurrection. But how was I supposed to explain it to him if even I found it difficult to understand? Fortunately, it's not something he'll consider a problem. The Emperor was relatively lenient towards the Imperial Counts and merciful to wounded veterans who had dedicated themselves to the Empire. The executive manager fell into both categories, so he wouldn't look at him badly. Besides, the outcome was undeniably beneficial to the Empire and the Imperial family. Even if the process made no sense, the results spoke for themselves. The Emperor would probably just nod after some thinking and let it pass. Yes, so I should report it as is. If the Emperor expressed doubt, then I'd grill the executive manager at that time. There's no need to summon him specifically. The anniversary of the end of the Great Northern War was coming up soon. The executive manager would come to the capital for the memorial service. Then, there was no need to waste resources in summoning someone who'd be here anyway. Chapter 337, We're here on a trip 5. We were able to enjoy an uneventful school trip without any commotion or incidents after enjoying a seaside date on the second day. Actually, it would be stranger if there was a commotion during a school trip. Our first day was just exceptionally unusual. If there was one thing that could be called an incident, it was that the young Duke was added to our group. It seemed that the experience in the sanctuary area left a strong impression on her, and she hinted to Uncle that she wanted to go out and play more. Uncle was naturally delighted to see his daughter, who used to only read books in her room, wanting to go out on her own. Good morning, Your Grace. Good morning, young Duke. Please take care of me today, too. And this was the result. We now had a daily morning schedule of picking up the young Duke from the ducal palace. I didn't particularly mind. I would have chosen death instead if the young Duke had a personality like a mini-wise duchess, but the young Duke was thankfully a gift from Enon, who took pity on the Salon family. She was kind, adorable, and well-mannered. She was a joy to have around, and everyone genuinely seemed to enjoy her presence. You're so diligent, getting up so early in the morning. It's a good example your vassals should follow. The Mage Duchess smiled gently and patted the young Duke's head. Knowing from experience what kind of words the young Duke liked, everyone gave compliments like this when doting on her. It's my duty as the young Duke to observe the territory. Foo-foo, that's right, well done. The Mage Duchess looked at the young Duke, who was puffing up with pride, with warm eyes. Anyone could see she was treating her like a child, but the young Duke tended to let it slide when it was the Mage Duchess doing it. From the Mage Duchess's perspective, even the iron-blooded Duke and the invincible Duke probably were children, so the young Duke seemed grateful just to be praised by her. She wasn't just stubborn, but also had a strangely realistic sense. She'd make a great politician someday. Where are we going today? I couldn't help but smile after seeing the young Duke's eyes sparkle. We made bread in the granary region the day before yesterday, and yesterday we watched the Mermaids' underwater show. Since she had fun for 2 days in a row, she had plenty of reasons to look forward to what was next. Let's start by riding horses. We'll wander around and go wherever looks interesting. At my words, the young duke's expression turned a bit gloomy. She must have ridden horses often with Uncle or the wise Duchess, so it was probably nothing new for her. To be specific, we're planning to ride centaurs. Her face lit up again at those words. As I thought, centaurs must be a first for her. Perfect, I know just who to call. That was Deleuze, the centaur with the soul of a guide we rode on the second day. She even introduced herself, asking us to look for her if we planned to ride centaurs again. She wasn't problematic, so I was quite willing to ride with her again. Moreover, I was rather curious to see what would happen if we paired the friendly and talkative centaur with the young duke who was curious about the world. It should be the perfect combination. Oh, guests, we meet again. Welcome. Wow. The young duke let out a dazed gasp as soon as she saw Deleuze waving her hand. I'm glad she seems to like her. As expected, my choice wasn't wrong. If we keep going this way, we'll reach Lake Fromble. It's connected to the river flowing through the non-human sanctuary area, so curious mermaids sometimes go as far as that. Lake. Of course, someone as wise as the young duke already knows this. That's right, I know that, as expected of your intelligence. Deleuze managed to trot at a comfortable pace that didn't frighten the young duke while kindly explaining the surrounding geography. To top it off, she cleverly sprinkled in compliments to boost the little duke's mood. Perfect, we have a hospitality specialist right here. If she had been born human instead of a centaur, she might have been an inseparable duo with the Gold Duke. Sometimes young mermaids get caught by the villagers while they're fishing in the lake. Then what happens? Nothing much. They're released back with a warning to be more careful. In return, the mermaids give a fish from the lake as a thank you gift. They give rare ones that are hard to catch by fishing, so the residents like it too. Meanwhile, hearing stories of humans and other races coexisting peacefully warmed my heart. If it were Apelles, they would have taken the child mermaid hostage to catch its parents. She talks a lot, doesn't she? Deleuze's younger sister who was carrying me spoke up as I watched the young duke and Deleuze chattering non-stop. That's true, but it's actually nice that she knows so many interesting stories. Thank you for saying that. My sister loves to talk, so her mouth doesn't stop once she gets someone on her ride. For a moment, I was reminded of the talkative taxi drivers I used to see in my prepossession world. Those were people who seemed to have meeting people as their goal rather than making money. It seemed that Deleuze was that type, too. Actually, one of our ancestors joined Kefalofen and fought against Apelles. Maybe that's why my sister talks even more when she has human passengers. Oh, so you're a descendant of a war hero. Haha, I guess you could say that. The younger sister laughed softly, continuing to bring up various topics after that. Looking at it this way, this younger sister seemed quite talkative, too. That made sense. It wasn't like their ancestors' blood only flowed in one of them. It probably ran in the family. Oh right, do you know about the Hell's Gate? It's a pit created by the Dragon Lord's breath against the Apelles army, and they say it's still hot and has been turned into a restricted area. What? That'd be definitely something I'd want to see. I'd been feeling so good these days. Hee. I couldn't help but smile while thinking about how Lily was happily playing outside with her older brothers. My little Lily had finally discovered the joys of outdoor fun. This mother was so worried. Of course, I love Lily even when she's quiet and smart too, but at that age, she should run around and play. That's how she'd grow up healthy. My uncle is really the best. Thanks to her older brothers, Lily was having the time of her life, and how lucky we were that the school trip's destination was Chenis. It would be nice if they came next year too. So, let's take a shot of whiskey to celebrate. Just as I was about to, the communication crystal suddenly started glowing. What's this? Maybe it's nephew, or little nephew. Either way, this aunt welcomes it. It's been a while, wise Duchess. It's not. I saw a face other than nephew's when I picked up the communication crystal. It was a gray-haired man with his usual cigar in hand. Gold Duke. Ah, I was hoping it'd be my nephew's. My, what a clearly disappointed expression. I'm a bit hurt, but the Gold Duke contacts me only for troublesome things. You make it sound like I'm carrying the plague around. The slight smile on his face gave me a bit of hope. Maybe, just maybe, it isn't anything serious this time. Well, you're right, but, I take it back. He's the worst. Anyway, it's an important matter, so I contacted you directly. It's an urgent issue, so I hope you can listen even if you have other business. What is it? Did Gerino raise their tariffs again, or is business not going well? I tilted my head and waited for the Gold Duke's answer. What could it be? If the Gold Duke said it was urgent, then it must have something to do with money, right? All of the Special Service Agency's forces in the north have been ordered to withdraw. I just heard about it through my in-laws, so the other dukes probably don't know yet. Ellipsis. I burned off the alcohol circulating in my body and exhaled it as smoke. All of them, all of them. At those words, I set the bottle of liquor down on the table. I wish it had been a money issue instead. This was a real bombshell. The order came down just now, so most forces are still stationed there. But they've been instructed to prioritize immediate withdrawal over completing their missions. It was a detailed explanation, but not a welcome one. It was no ordinary headache if all forces received a simultaneous order to withdraw not after completing their missions but after stopping them. Such orders were given in one of two cases: when there was no more benefit in continuing the missions, or when there was a high possibility of total annihilation if they operated in smaller units like battalions or divisions. Impressive. It's been 5 years, hasn't it? Has it already been that long? No, it's hard to believe it's only been that long. Just like 5 years ago, when the rebel rose up. But it's not certain. We've been seriously hit by late judgments before, so they might be overreacting a little. That was a possibility. When the rebel appeared, the Special Service Agency forces operating in the north failed to withdraw in time and suffered serious damage. Having just recovered their momentum, they wouldn't want to repeat the mistake from 5 years ago. It was only natural for them to panic at the slightest sign. Of course, this was all just speculation. Are you serious? At least, I hope that's all it is. The Gold Duke answered as if he wasn't expecting it to be. And yet, he was right. The Special Service Agency's overreaction was just wishful thinking. They were being careful because they suffered serious damage. Maybe this was true for other departments, but not the Special Service Agency. These were people who would keep advancing even with a knife in their body unless the Emperor ordered otherwise. And they withdrew just out of fear of damage. That's nonsense. The Special Service Agency's withdrawal was His Majesty's will. And if His Majesty had decreed a full withdrawal, it was a sign that something truly dire was unfolding in the north. You'll probably hear from the Imperial Palace soon. I just wanted to give you a heads up so you don't rush when the time comes. Things get messy enough when everything's in chaos. Ha, at least last year was a good harvest. That's a relief. The year before was a bad one, wasn't it? Those words brought back memories. The appearance of the rebel, the nomads, uprising, and the war that lasted for 2 years. The worst part was the famine right before the war. Feeding the population and securing military provisions at the same time had been no different from hell. Well, I'll hang up now. Vulcan's forge will be busy soon, so I should send plenty of materials to make it easier for the iron-blooded Duke. I just nodded silently, and the light from the communication crystal disappeared. Then, I picked up the bottle I had put on the desk. Forget celebration and well wishes, this was just a shot of whiskey out of frustration. The young Duke was now sound asleep after thoroughly enjoying swimming in Lake Fromble while being held by the mermaids. It wasn't surprising, playing in the water was much more tiring than most activities. It was a bit inconvenient that she remained asleep all the way to the mansion, but... Nephew, did you have fun? Right on cue, the wise Duchess waved her arms at the main gate. He, did our Lily Tilda have fun? Yes, she must be very tired. The wise Duchess grinned upon seeing the young Duke sleeping on my back and carefully took her into her arms. Judging by the way she was looking at the young Duke with eyes full of affection despite their different personalities, it was clear that the young Duke definitely was her own daughter. Thank you, I bet she had a lot of fun with you guys. We enjoyed ourselves as well. I smiled slightly, and the wise Duchess chuckled too. It wasn't just lip service. The young Duke was quite the mood maker, so it was fun. Oh right, nephew, lend me your ear for a second. Ah, yes. The wise Duchess beckoned just as I was about to return to our lodgings after sending the young Duke back, so I carefully leaned in. Harsh winter winds are heading for the north soon. Keep that in mind. That clear, sober whisper froze me in place. Chapter 338. Is another war coming? 1. I unconsciously looked out the window and saw an unusually barren sky, bare of even clouds. Also, the weather was almost summery. I wasn't sure if I should be happy about the clear sky or annoyed by the heat. Of course, I'd normally just shrug it off since I rarely went outside the building, but even this serene weather felt unsettling now. Was this what they meant by the calm before the storm? Harsh winter winds are heading for the north soon. Keep that in mind. My head started throbbing as the wise Duchess's words from the school trip came to mind. Damn it, I couldn't help but sigh. Having the wise Duchess sober up and speak so clearly was already ominous, but why did it have to be about the North of all things? I could at least comfort myself that it was only speculation if it was just a vague statement like, something might happen soon. However, the wise Duchess specifically pointed out the North. No matter how carefree the wise Duchess seemed, she wasn't one to joke about such things, so it was practically confirmed. Moreover, the Mage Duchess had been unusually quiet ever since we returned to the academy after the school trip. The Dukes know. The wise Duchess's hint and the Mage Duchess's silence. It was safe to assume that at least all 5 Dukes had heard something. On the other hand, there seemed to be no sign of anything unusual anywhere apart from the Dukes. Even the second manager who was in charge of information knew nothing, and the information department's executive manager thoroughly avoided answering me when I recently probed him about it. It seemed the Emperor had imposed a strict embargo on information, involving only the Dukes and selected departments in the North. With the Emperor himself enforcing this level of secrecy, there was no way to bypass it without breaking my neck. Of all times, why now? This was driving me crazy. The anniversary of the Great Northern War was coming up soon and I had to go pay my respects, but it felt bitter to meet those guys in such an unsettling situation. The peace we'd achieved by ending Kagan's reign of terror now felt as fragile as ever. How could I possibly face them and say that the peace they died for might crumble? I should have killed him. I massaged the back of my neck and sighed. If there was trouble in the North, then the culprit was likely Dorgan. I had already lost count of how many times I'd clashed with that bastard. I had countless opportunities to kill him, but I failed to finish him off, and now we were in this mess. I wouldn't feel this hopeless if any of the other 8 war machines had survived instead. The other war machines were mere tribal chiefs or warriors, so they had no justification to control the North. But Dorgan was the heir of the Gaar tribe that first unified the nomads, Kagan's bloodline, and one of the main figures who opposed the Empire. With these crazy titles plastered all over him, he was practically a living banner of rebellion. Tens of thousands will gather under him if he stages a proper uprising. A force of that size couldn't be subdued by small, elite units. This world might allow exceptional individuals to stand out, but no one could truly overcome the power of an organized mass. Kagan almost became the only individual to defeat a group, but he fell, and his death only emphasized the power of the collective. If the northern unrest spiraled into the worst-case scenario, the Empire would have to squeeze out troops again just 3 years after the war ended. What a nightmare. Oppa, we're here. Ah, you guys came. While I was organizing my thoughts and tapping my fingers on the desk, the club members who finished their classes came flooding in. Let's wait. I quickly composed my expression and greeted them with a smile. Yes, waiting was the best course of action. If information was locked down tight, then I had no choice but to wait for the embargo to lift. Acting rashly would only anger the Emperor. And maybe, just maybe, the anomaly in the North could be resolved with small, elite operations. Not that I was feeling particularly hopeful. I'd been trying to maintain a smiling face for the past few days. If I showed even a hint of a blank expression, the Mage Duchess would start to look worried even though it was just my default expression. Still, I understood. She'd heard classified information that she couldn't share, and her partner was left completely in the dark. It was a rather uncomfortable situation. She might want to tell me personally, but we both knew that letting personal feelings dictate actions in this kind of matter would only lead to a political mess. So what else could I do but act like everything was fine? Thankfully, I had already let go of any lingering frustration about the information embargo, so it wasn't really an act. Baby, I'm planning to attend the memorial this time. Would you like to go together? Instead, she indirectly let me know that there's no chance the information control will be lifted before the memorial service. This seemed to be the most she could do for me under the circumstances. I'd like that. I still haven't managed to find a teleportation mage, so thank you. I expressed my gratitude with a still smiling face, and the Mage Duchess smiled back. Anyway, all this trouble we're going through is because of that bastard Dorgan. He was just making things awkward for the Mage Duchess for no reason. The World Tree incident caused by the prosecutor's office's executive manager became trivial compared to what happened next. With the return of the masked unit, the Blue Claw Knights, and the Black Mane Knights, all forces operating in the North have returned. The focus was on ensuring a safe retreat, so there were no fatalities while there were injuries. Prioritize treatment based on severity rather than rank. Yes, Your Majesty. The emperor briefly responded to the successful withdrawal report, and the minister of the Special Service Agency bowed and retreated. At least the disaster of 5 years ago hadn't been repeated. The empire had successfully avoided the catastrophic loss of its most elite forces, a disaster that would have been devastating given their importance in any future conflict. Successful, it was hard not to feel bitter about the word. Calling a full retreat successful felt pathetic. I might have laughed bitterly at the thought if I wasn't in front of the emperor. But this was the North we were talking about. The North that inflicted more damage on the empire than even the wars with the Eastern kingdoms, where we barely avoided defeat rather than achieving a glorious victory. Even now, the name, North, was nothing short of a nightmare for the empire's leadership. Crown Prince. Yes, Your Majesty. And it seemed the same for the emperor, as his expression was even more rigid than before. Those who have never been bound will never unite. But those who have been bound even once can unite twice, thrice, and as many times as it takes. This might seem like an out-of-nowhere statement, but it was clearly aimed at the northern nomads. For centuries, they had never formed a unified force and had been crushed by settled states, including the empire. Then came the rebel, who unified them into a single force capable of challenging the empire. Though their rebellion ended in failure, the memory of that unity and defiance didn't disappear. That was why the emperor saw this current unrest as the second coming of that rebellion. To dismiss it as a one-time occurrence would be dangerously naive. What should we do with those who constantly try to unite? I bowed my head at those words. This was not the aging emperor preparing for abdication. This was the empire's supreme ruler, demanding an answer from his successor. Punish them decisively and make them understand they are nothing more than a fleeting chapter in the empire's long history. I gave a bold and uncompromising answer regarding the enemies who once threatened the empire's divine mandate and who now defile the northern territories the empire, seeking to cultivate. Of course, this might be too aggressive for a leader who should consider all possibilities and seek the best solution. After all, there might still be a way to resolve this peacefully. That is also my will. However, this was the answer the emperor wanted. Because this was the way to widely proclaim the dignity of the imperial family and the firmness of the mandate of heaven. The minister agreed to prepare the boyar wine for the memorial service. 2 years ago, I volunteered to handle the preparations but couldn't secure any of the wines available on the market. In the end, I ended up pleading with the Gold Duke for help. Last year, I managed to secure not just 1 but 2 stocks of wine instead, ending up with 12 bottles in total, far more than needed. The minister probably thought it'd be better to prepare it alone than to go through that again. Did you pack everything? You know I just need to show up, there's nothing to pack. Thanks to that, I could move freely this year. Well, wasn't it more appropriate for someone in the capital to prepare them rather than someone coming from afar? Those guys would probably think so, too. Besides, when else would they get to drink alcohol bought by their superior? Gerard had also been planning to raid the minister's cellar once the war ended, so being treated to boyar wine every year was no different from fulfilling that wish. It's been a while since we've seen Eli. Seeing the Mage Duchess smile gently made me admire the first manager. She quickly started calling the Mage Duchess, Unnie, and now had her using her nickname. This level of intimacy just from communicating via communication crystal was simply amazing. Is this how the Crown Princess was enchanted? Too, I decided to think of it that way. If the Mage Duchess was enchanted, then there was no reason she couldn't have worked her magic on the Crown Princess, too. Well, shall we go? Sure, I nodded and took the Mage Duchess's outstretched hand. High-level mages didn't necessarily need physical contact to teleport someone, but it was a nice excuse for a bit of hand-holding. Small gestures like this could also deepen bonds. After taking my hand, the Mage Duchess glanced at me and spoke. By the way, baby, if I were to visit that child's grave during this trip. It's okay, let's go another time. I cut her off gently but firmly. I understood her sentiment, but now wasn't the right moment. The child the Mage Duchess was talking about was Hecate. I agreed that visiting her grave with my lovers was important, but this wasn't the occasion for it. The minister will be there for the memorial. Introducing my fiancé in the presence of a former superior would just feel off. Let's plan for a better time when everyone can come together. Alright, if that's what you think. I simply meant there was no need to make an important occasion feel like an afterthought. Fortunately, the Mage Duchess seemed to understand and respected my wishes. It would look strange, a memorial visit that involved introducing a loved one to Hecate while a superior loomed in the background. It was a picture that didn't sit right. Not to mention the fact that it would be disrespectful to mix my personal affairs with a solemn occasion meant to honor the departed. We'd be in the capital during the vacation anyway, so we could go then. Chapter 339, Is Another War Coming? 2. Unlike last year, we moved right on schedule for the memorial this year. I would have buried myself in the prosecutor's office to pass the time if I were alone, but I had to restrain myself since I was traveling with the Mage Duchess. Going to the prosecutor's office would mean a duke's surprise visit, while going to the Magic Tower would mean its master coming. Meanwhile, going to my mansion would mean one of its prospective mistresses was coming. It was crazy either way. You finally made it. I thought you'd died. Thanks to this, the first words I heard upon meeting the minister at the memorial was a survival check. For someone who cared, you didn't bother to contact me. I figured you'd resurrect somehow. Spitting out strange jokes and then smirking, he bowed to the Mage Duchess beside me. Deborah Briad of Blochen, Imperial Minister of the Ministry of Finance and the House of Briad, greets the esteemed Mage Duchess. It's been a while, Minister. I'm glad to see you're well. It's thanks to your Grace's concern. The minister flinched at the sight of the Mage Duchess politely responding to a mere count, but he quickly composed himself and continued naturally. It was a wise response. The Mage Duchess was being polite because the minister was my direct superior. If the minister had shown discomfort in that situation, he would have been the one hurt. As expected, the quick-wittedness he showed on the battlefield hadn't gone anywhere. The invincible Duke is in the front row. Both the executive manager and I are seated there as well. Would you join us? The Mage Duchess nodded to the polite invitation, acknowledging that it wouldn't look right for a duke to stand at the back. It's grander than last year. As I walked to the front row, I checked out the attendees at the memorial. Like last year, the Minister of the Imperial Household and the Minister of War were present from the administration. But from the Parliament, Count Vardon, the chairman, came in person. I even saw several high-ranking officials from the military. I couldn't help but smile slightly at the increasingly grand lineup year after year. At least it seemed like those guys wouldn't become forgotten heroes. The memorial, which had been buzzing with greetings, fell silent as the minister of the imperial household began reading the eulogy. No one dared to disturb this solemn occasion, especially when the emperor's words were being read. The empire was not built in a day, nor by the hands of one person. It stands today because countless heroes carved its history with their blood. The content of the eulogy wasn't much different from last year. Mourning for the heroes who died fighting for the empire, and supreme praise that the empire existed because of those heroes. In fact, it would be stranger if the content changed every time when mentioning something that had already happened. Unless the imperial family chose to erase the Great Northern War from history as an inconvenient truth, the narrative would remain the same. The blood spilled by past generations and the legacy they left behind obligate us to pass on that glory and sacrifice. To do so, we must not fear bloodshed. Or so I thought. The empire's history is one of duty, sacrifice, and glory. We, too, are part of this history. To sever that chain in our time would be an unspeakable sin. This bold proclamation sent ripples through the crowd of nobles. Blood, sacrifice, legacy, and the call not to fear bloodshed. The implications were clear to anyone listening. Of course, not everyone reacted. The minister of the imperial household maintained an unreadable poker face while reading the eulogy, and the invincible duke showed no reaction as if he had already been briefed. These bigwigs, the emperor's closest aide and the highest military commander, were just maintaining their positions and performing their roles. Anyone with half a brain could see what this hinted at. When I glanced around to confirm who else might have known, I saw the minister frowning and the Mage Duchess with a complicated expression. That's where it stops. If the finance minister and a duke were left in the dark, there was no way anyone beneath them had been informed. This was a tightly guarded announcement, prepared after consulting only a select few, perhaps the crown prince or the minister of the special service agency. And the fact that it was dropped at a gathering of high-ranking officials from the administration, imperial council, and military meant they intended to make it public soon. The heroes sacrifice and shall continue to future generations through any hardship. The reading ended amid the commotion, followed by a mechanical moment of silence. Even my own thoughts were in chaos during that moment of silence. It was a gravestone I revisited after about a year, no, half a year, but I could only quickly pour some boyar wine and leave. In the current situation, staying in front of the gravestone would only fill my head with other thoughts, so it'd be better to come and pay my respects another time. Executive manager. What? The second manager cautiously spoke up right after the minister finished paying his respects and hurriedly left. I'll go ahead, too. The information control should be lifted by now. I nodded since it made sense. Since it was publicly announced at the memorial, information would start trickling out one by one. The second manager would come back with quite useful information if he acted now. Go ahead. If you need anything, handle it first and then report. Yes, sir. The second manager bowed and quickly disappeared. Watching his retreating figure, I let out a small sigh. It was already a day when my heart was bound to be complicated for various reasons, and now my head was complicated too. It was enough to drive me crazy. After rubbing my face a few times, I turned to the managers who were still around. They had all heard the emperor's eulogy too, so they were likely grappling with their own troubles. Keeping them here longer would only worsen things. Like the second manager, it was better to send them off to focus on what mattered. You guys go ahead too. I'll get some fresh air before going back. Understood. We'll report immediately if anything comes up. All right. Following the senior manager who spoke first, the other managers disappeared one after another. Except for the first manager. Executive manager, do you want to sit down somewhere? You don't look good. It's fine. Beatrix is waiting outside, so I should go quickly. I smiled slightly at the first manager and started walking. I appreciated her concern, but my mind and heart were too chaotic to stay any longer. I'd rushed through the memorial for a reason. Besides, there wasn't really anywhere to sit. I couldn't do something crazy like sitting on a gravestone. Executive manager, do you want to stay in the capital until club time? At those words, I looked at the first manager again. If it were any other time, I would have thought that she was just lonely and pestering me to stay. She's probably right. Unfortunately, given the current situation, it was best to do as the first manager said. The second manager would be frantically gathering the information that was about to pour out now that the information control was lifted, and the senior manager would find peculiarities in his own way, not to mention the minister. If I left for the academy now, I'd have to handle the flood of information via communication crystals instead of face-to-face briefings. That would be less efficient and more error-prone. Staying until later in the day, at least until club activities started, seemed best. After all, travel time wasn't even a factor with the Mage Duchess's teleportation. In fact, I would have probably stayed to hang out with the first manager even if it weren't for this incident. Let's have a meal, the three of us. Is that okay? Yes. For now, let's avoid the prosecutor's office. They'd just feel awkward if the executive manager was standing around while everyone was busy. I glanced at Beatrix Honey while watching the executive manager drink water with a stiff expression. She seemed to have a lot on her mind too, slowly cutting her steak. It had been a while since I'd seen the executive manager and Honey, but the atmosphere was not good at all. And it wasn't the kind of situation where we could force a cheerful mood, either. Of all days, it had to be today. I wanted to sigh, but I held back because of the atmosphere. Who could have predicted that a day meant for honoring fallen heroes would end with talk of another war? Of course, the anniversary of the Great Northern War's end was the perfect moment to emphasize the Empire's stability, but this felt sudden, even shocking. If I feel this way, then the executive manager must. I did attend the memorial with the executive manager, but I'd never actually seen the Six Swords. We were in different divisions and areas of activity, so I didn't even know their names before the Great Northern War. I only learned about their legendary deeds after the war, along with the fact that these team leaders were the executive manager's close friends. That was why I was worried about the executive manager. If just hearing their names made my chest tighten, how much worse must it be for the executive manager? He must have felt displeased that the day meant for the Six Swords was being overshadowed by this chaos, and worried at the same time about the anomaly. That was the cause of such chaos. Those emotions must be eating him up inside. The executive manager would never admit it out loud, but this Nuna had spent enough years by his side to know better. Honey, there's wine from Servette among the wines here. Ah, yes, Servette's wine is quite good, though not at the level of Boyar wine. That's why it sells quite well in the capital region. I casually spoke to Honey while checking the executive manager's expression. I should probably cheer up Honey first, and then the two of us could comfort the executive manager. Fortunately, Honey seemed to understand my intention and responded with a gentle face. Well, Servette is close, so transportation is easy. The Gold Duke would be disappointed if he knew. Fufu, the Gold Duke's territory may be far, but it's that much more fertile. If there's a disadvantage, there's usually an advantage too. As small talk became the topic, the executive manager's expression started to soften. More accurately, he was pretending to be okay, but that was enough for no. Suddenly, a faint light leaked from the executive manager's chest. It seemed that someone contacted the executive manager's communication crystal. We were so close. It was so frustrating. The executive manager's expression was just about to soften, but someone had to be so tactless. Executive manager, it's me. I gently bit my lip at the urgent voice as soon as the executive manager activated the communication crystal. So the second manager was the culprit. What is it? I told you to use what you need and report later. The executive manager responded indifferently to the second manager. Right, the executive manager had already given him autonomy. But didn't that defeat the purpose of giving autonomy if he went to find information and contacted the executive manager so soon? Something urgent came up that I need to report. I was a bit surprised. The second manager found information to report in less than an hour since he started. Even for him, that should be difficult. You found something already. I didn't find it, the intelligence department told us. They were just waiting for the control to be lifted and spread it all at once. The executive manager frowned at those words. The intelligence department passing on information without another department requesting it first only happened when there was a critical matter that needed to be dealt with without wasting a single second, especially if it was a matter to be communicated to all departments. The second manager, seeming to sense the gravity of the situation, blurted out the information roughly. The gap in supplies flowing into the north, the sudden appearance of remnants from tribes that participated in the Great Northern War, it was because of dungeons. What? Those crazy bastards were using the dungeons like barracks. The Special Service Agency never even suspected it because no one would be as crazy as to approach a dungeon during routine patrols in the north. That's why it stayed hidden until now. The room fell silent at this unexpected information. As the second manager said, there was no reason to touch the dungeons while searching the harsh north unless the Special Service Agency went mad. Moreover, the north was so huge that even the Empire wouldn't know if strange dungeons appeared somewhere. The number of dungeons scattered across the north was immeasurable. Proportionally, the supplies and troops that might be hidden in those dungeons were also unaccountable. The Special Service Agency just discovered nomads coming out of a dungeon and barely found out. They had no idea how many dungeons might be being used like barracks, so they had no choice but to withdraw. The executive manager remained silent. If the North, or more precisely, Dorgan, used dungeons like his own home in this crazy way, then there was a high possibility that most of the missing from the Great Northern War could suddenly become survivors. Those monsters who tormented the Imperial Army under the rebel would once again mount their horses and ravage the North. And I just found out that the Minister of the Imperial Household has summoned all ministers. His Majesty the Emperor has personally gone to the Imperial Council. No one could deny the second manager's words as he added that something big would come by the end of today at the latest. A few hours after lunch, the something big arrived, just as the second manager had predicted. The communication crystal flashed with an ominous reddish color, an unpleasant warning sound that seemed to tear at the ears. This is driving me crazy. I couldn't help but laugh hollowly as soon as I checked the message that arrived on the communication crystal. Confirmation of a Khan's emergence and the assembly of nomadic forces. All nobles of Count rank and above, administrative officials of executive manager rank and above, all members of the Imperial Council, chief judges of district courts or higher, and military commanders of legion rank or above. All individuals falling under the above categories are to gather immediately in the main conference room of the Imperial Council. Damn those intelligence department bastards. So they didn't release all the information after all. They hadn't mentioned the word Khan. Chapter 340, Khan 1. Over 100 people had already gathered in the main conference room. It was natural, given that there were 30 resident council members in the Imperial Council, and add to that the administrative personnel nearby who would have rushed in instantly. However, despite it being a gathering of people who quickly avoided responsibility and prepared scapegoats when something happened as well as those full of ambition to show off their abilities for promotion, the conference room was surprisingly quiet. Of course, this was also natural. A single misstep and a poorly chosen word could swiftly turn someone into a scapegoat. Taking the lead on public opinion over such a perilous issue could destroy one's career if the emperor later overturned their actions. That was why every person in the room, despite their titles and influence, maintained their silence. Despite each being worthy of being called a big shot, they were waiting for the emperor's appearance, unable to lead and take responsibility for this situation confidently. We'll have to part ways now, so be careful. The conference room was so quiet that there was no reaction even when the executive manager and the Mage Duchess entered simultaneously. The Mage Duchess quickly surveyed the conference room and whispered carefully in my ear, hoping that I wouldn't get hurt in this minefield. Don't worry, I'll keep my mouth shut. I turned away immediately after giving a joking reply. I needed to go where the Ministry of Finance people were gathered, and the Mage Duchess needed to go where the Invincible Duke was. I'm sorry for being late. It's fine, there are more people who haven't arrived yet. The minister shook his head when I apologized to him and the other directors. He wasn't wrong, I had only made it on time because I'd been in the capital. Those coming from the provinces would be scrambling to arrive, with teleportation mages working overtime to bring them here. Udasur Dorgan has declared himself Khan. It's the last piece of information the Special Service Agency found out as they were retreating. So it was that bastard after all. The minister informed me in a low voice after I exchanged nods with the other directors and sat next to the minister. As soon as I heard those words, I felt sorry for the unit that first received this information. How maddening must it have been to secure information about a Khan appearing while hurriedly withdrawing due to the general retreat order. It was too heavy a burden for a single unit to bear. Well, at least they had returned safely and managed to file their reports. For now, keep your thoughts to yourself and just listen. Neither you nor I are in a position to get involved in the war unless His Majesty orders it. I know, don't worry, I nodded. The minister was right. Despite our roles in the Great Northern War, we were now part of the Ministry of Finance. It wasn't our place to speak on matters of war when the Ministry of War and Special Service Agency were present. Until explicitly instructed by the Emperor, our input was unwelcome. As we settled into silence, more attendees began to trickle in, provincial dukes, commanders of regional forces, nobles who ruled over huge estates, and judges in charge of courts. It was a rare sight to see so many high-ranking individuals gathered in one place, except at the New Year's ball. Moreover, unlike the New Year's ball where all titled nobles gathered, this assembly strictly gathered only high-ranking officials. It was no exaggeration to say that this conference room was now the heart and brain of the empire. Nobles who follow the mandate of heaven, kneel. When it seemed like no more people were entering, the minister of the imperial household on the platform spoke. The nobles immediately knelt. This was the signal that the emperor would soon arrive. Moments later, the sound of footsteps echoed through the conference room. Raise your heads. Everyone raised their heads at the emperor's command, but their expressions weren't very good. The long display of titles and positions was a key element in the emperor's processions. If an emperor who valued imperial authority skipped this process, then it meant that the situation was urgent. As we raised our heads, we saw the emperor seated on the throne prepared on the platform, with the crown prince and Ainter standing behind him. He was called in, too. I couldn't help but feel sorry for Ainter, who stood stiffly frozen. To be dragged into this after spending an ordinary day at the academy just hours ago, it seemed like he was performing his duties a little too intensely. Still, it must be better than his discarded days as an imperial. Hang in there, hear ye, my lords. Your loyalty to the imperial family and the empire in protecting the mandate of heaven is indeed flawless, but the recent disturbances have threatened the mandate despite your efforts. At those words, the already quiet conference room grew even colder. Everyone knew the emperor was referring to the Great Northern War and the following succession dispute, both of which had shaken the empire to its core. However, it was a different matter for the emperor to personally acknowledge, we almost lost everything. With the blessing of Enin and the legacy of our ancestors, the empire has vanquished those who dared challenge its mandate. But once again, disturbances have arisen in the north. The emperor's words made it clear, this crisis would not be dismissed lightly. At the same time, he also showed his will to never overlook those responsible for causing such a crisis. How far will this go? I bit my lip slightly. The crisis the emperor was speaking about wasn't a natural disaster. It was a man-made disaster where Kagan's blood kin, who survived the Great Northern War, had once again united the nomadic forces. It was a calamity, where someone must be held responsible. Who would shoulder it? The Invincible Duke, who failed to eliminate Dorgan in the Great Northern War. The Special Service Agency that couldn't find Dorgan for the past 3 years. Or Margrave Sorden, who failed to control the disturbances in the north. There's no stopping this. The emperor already wielded immense authority, and now he had an irrefutable justification for using it. He had summoned the empire's high-ranking officials in a political show of strength, and publicly declared the northern unrest a threat to the nation. In this situation, even someone as powerful as the invincible Duke could face a fall if the Emperor demanded accountability, and the Special Service Agency's leadership might see a complete overhaul. Faced with this reality, no one dared to speak. Normally, this room would have been filled with declarations of loyalty and bold promises to eradicate the Emperor's foes. But in the shadow of uncertain punishment, speaking up felt like volunteering to be the next sacrificial lamb. Margrave Sordin. And then the scope was set. Yes, Your Majesty. A middle-aged man, Margrave Sordin, carefully bowed his head and answered the Emperor's call. At that call, both pity and relief flashed across the nobles' faces. Him being called first meant that the Emperor considered his responsibility to be the greatest. If Margrave Sordin was the highest responsible person, then there was very little chance for others to be involved. You had the duty to assist the imperial family above and ensure the peace of the people below you. Because you had a great responsibility to guard the border and strive for the stability of the empire, the imperial family bestowed upon your ancestors authority befitting that responsibility. Margraves were fewer in number than dukes if you simply looked at the numbers. They were the king of the borderlands, of which there were only 3 in the empire. Margraves received exceptional authority and freedom because they had to respond quickly to border disturbances, and they were also given the consideration of not having to attend the New Year's ball. But with great authority came immense responsibility, and the Margrave must unconditionally take responsibility for anything that happened in his jurisdiction. However, you failed to live up to the imperial family's trust. At this firm sentence, the Margrave bowed his head even lower. Margrave Sordin was the Margrave responsible for the north. His role was to control the nomads and keep the empire's northern border peaceful. But as the Emperor said, Margrave Sordin failed in that role. The nomads have regrouped, and the border had to worry about a second Kagan. He was given authority but failed to fulfill his responsibility. Just as your predecessor failed to prevent the rise of the rebel, your failure is deeply disappointing. Just like the previous Margrave Sordin. Do you have anything to say? I am a sinner who failed to repay your Majesty's excessive trust and failed to fulfill a noble's duty to protect the stability of the empire and its subjects. How could I have anything to say? I will humbly follow your Majesty's judgment. As if he had been prepared for this situation from the moment the assembly order was issued, Margrave Sordin spoke in a calm voice. It was sad. The previous Margrave Sordin was executed for failing to prevent the unification of the nomads, and now his son was about to fall for the same crime. I strip Barnio Enirua of Sordin of his title of Margrave and also revoke the authority of Margrave bestowed upon the Enirua family. From now on, the Margrave territory of Sordin will be called the County of Sordin. The Enirua family's elevated position was no longer sustainable, and the Emperor's decree made it clear, the imperial family could no longer place its trust in them. However, considering that the Enirua family's merits outweigh their faults and that Barnio Enirua's contributions in participating in the last Great Northern War were by no means small, there will be no further punishment. You are allowed to pass your title on to your child. Barnio visibly flinched at these following words. He had been prepared for execution, but it ended with just the revocation of his title. Although the privilege of being a Margrave was taken away, his family's title was still that of a count, which was still considered part of high nobility. If he was allowed to pass this on to his child, his family may stagger a bit, but it wouldn't collapse. The situation skyrocketed from hell to heaven in an instant. Perhaps because of this, Barnio spoke with a slightly trembling voice. I am overwhelmed and ashamed by the great mercy shown to a sinner who has no right to complain. Although I have disappointed your Majesty, my family will forever live up to your Majesty's mercy and trust. I look forward to the loyalty of the Enirua County. Long live His Majesty, and long live the Empire. With those words, Barnio bowed and left the conference room. Having been stripped of his title, he was no longer a part of the assembly. Minister of Intelligence, speak about the disturbances in the north. The Emperor spoke quietly as he watched Barnio's exit. Yes, Your Majesty. The Minister of the Intelligence looked flustered at the sudden call, but he soon answered naturally. All responsibility had been shouldered by Barnio, so there was no more sword to be swung. The accountability had been settled. Udasar Dorgan, son of Gar Udasar Batar, who was the chief of the Gar tribe, has declared himself Khan. Now, the true battle began.